And I saw this aired on the History Channel, and it took me back to 2014 when I visited New York to go see the obelisk, because I kept being called back to go see it. And nothing would stop me from going to see it, as far as just to get it over with, to go see what I needed to see. And when I did go see it, I knew why. And I have the proof because I recorded it. So when they explained in this documentary about the history and the mystery of the obelisk, I'm going to show you my direct connection to this obelisk. This obelisk, 3,500-year-old obelisk in New York, in Manhattan, Central Park. Now, I was born and raised in New York on Long Island, but my family came out of the city to Long Island like a lot of people did. But we always went back into the city. And when I got old enough, I would go there myself, traveling into Manhattan, Long Island Railroad, taking the subways up all the way up through Harlem and up into the Bronx to see my aunt in Manhattan, 90th, West 90th Street, going through the park itself. That was always my favorite thing to do, was get to New York, go down and hang out around the downtown and 42nd Street and Broadway all day and night, but then always make it to 90th uptown and go to Central Park. It was just like two different worlds. Anybody who experienced it knows what I'm talking about. But knowing that I had that experience as a child and as an early adult going into adulthood, moving out of New York in 1981, but still had it in my mind. But when I ended up having my experience back in 1996, I was suddenly brought back to those memories, going back to New York. When I went to Egypt, I had to go through New York. The itinerary had me go through JFK, which took me back, and I knew I was going back in time because I was going back to where I was raised. So that was an alarm in my mind that this experience was taking me back track through my own tracking from coming from New York, going to Florida, coming to Orlando, and then going backwards through those tracks all the way to Egypt. And then when I got through all that, going to the pyramids, going to Karnak, knowing that my connection was there, and then coming back, and then still something on my mind. And it kept going back to Manhattan, because the 1996 let me know that it was 1996, and I remembered I was living on Columbus in 96 before I left New York. So that 1996 kept ringing back in my mind, 96, 96th Street. So everything kept going back to that point until I realized that the obelisk was there. So at that point, I knew there was a connection between me and that obelisk. So when I did go back finally in 2014, I recorded it. And the day I went back, and actually I did go record it, was on August 23rd, 2014, which was significant time and place because of the fact that August 23rd, 2014 was actually the same exact days of the year as it was back in 1969, August 23rd, Saturday, which is the day that my mother married my stepfather behind the house on Commander Avenue, which led us to move to Florida. So that was a timing that wasn't marked. And when I went there to New York on that day, that time, it didn't hit me until when I went to New York at that time. I wasn't thinking about that being the same day until I walked into the museum. And I realized that that was Saturday, August 23rd, which is also my cousin's birthday. But it was the timing of it. The time, almost to the exact time that my mother was married. And so I knew it wasn't a coincidence because that's when the sign went up back in 1996, was completed, August 22nd. August 23rd, it went up. It just went up at that time. Even when they were putting it up, and I asked them how long was it going to take, they were just telling me, oh, it's going to be up, it's going to be up. And it just happened to go up on that 22nd. And then the 23rd, it was finished. And I thought about it, how it went up exactly at that time. A reminder going back to how I ended up here, how I ended up coming to Florida, how I ended up going to Disney World when it first opened in 1972, being the first probably in my school or around my neighborhood to go to Disney World. And all this stuff came back to me. So when I go back to New York and I look at this time and place exactly, I knew it was no mistake. I knew that the obelisk itself was placed there by whatever means they did, was placed there for me to come to that point and see what it is. So I can exactly know why it's there. So with this being said, I want you to look at this video or look at this documentary, and I'm going to lay out some other things with it. And I'm going to show you my direct connection to this obelisk and those other two obelisks they're going to mention, that I can show you that I'm directly connected to them.
The history that we were all taught growing up is wrong. My name is Scott Wolter, and I'm a forensic geologist. There's a hidden history in this country that nobody knows about. There are pyramids here, chambers, tombs, inscriptions. They're all over this country. We're going to investigate these artifacts and sites, and we're going to get to the truth. Sometimes history isn't what we've been told. The Big Apple. Out of the 8 million people that live in this city, I wonder how many of them stop to think about the history all around them. Wall Street is named after a barricade that used to be there. One built by Dutch settlers in 1624 to keep the English out. Back then, Manhattan was actually called New Amsterdam, until the English finally broke through and gained complete control of the island, renaming it New York.
Now, what you just mentioned there about New York and the New Amsterdam, the Dutch, which I can show you here in Florida, King Charles. I can show you the connection that goes back to the origin of New York. Matter of fact, when I was in New York at that time in 2014, I stayed with friends who live in Brooklyn who have a connection that goes back to Virginia. And just so happened as I'm going back to look at this obelisk, I end up having to have the pleasure of riding with my friends, uh, Darnell Smith, down to the Carolinas to get his car and things checked out. And we stopped in his old family uh, plantation home they have, which goes back to the 1660s, which goes into the same time period that New Amsterdam came under control of the English. So it was no coincidence that I was going back into that time. I even recorded it. But just the idea of knowing that I was there, and then having the uh, also the side pleasure of going back and looking at this at the same time, parallel. And then parallel to that, knowing that there's a place or street that's directly connected to King Charles, that's directly connected to me. Knowing that this block, this street, goes back to that too. So all this was all intertwined. So when they mention New Amsterdam and New York, I know exactly what it means because I was taken there. I was being reminded as I'm there. Same as when I was there, it was Harlem Week. It was actually Marcus Garvey's birthday, week 2. So it was all these was all wrapped up, going back in time, knowing what it all connected, what it all is. So nothing was out of place when I was there during this period.
Clues to the past are hidden amongst the skyscrapers, subways, and street signs. I'm here because one New Yorker says she's discovered a mystery right in Central Park. A centuries-old tie between this modern city and ancient Egypt. That's a beautiful pendant. You must be Dorothy.
Yes, I am. Thank you. It's wonderful to see you, Scott. Here, sit down and let's talk. Do you know what this is?
I think so. That's a cartouche, and those symbols are Egyptian hieroglyphics. Cartouches are basically a rounded vertical oval shape that typically has the name of an Egyptian pharaoh. And they were often carved into stone and found inside the tombs of many of these pharaohs. And for archaeologists, they're very important because they can use them for dating. I don't think I know who that is, but I'll bet you do.
It's Thutmose III. He actually was one of the greatest pharaohs in Egypt because he expanded Egypt to its greatest size ever. And I did some research, and lo and behold, I found out that there's a monument in Central Park with this cartouche.
Really?
Yes.
Here in Central Park?
Here in Central Park. Why don't we go and take a look?
Sounds great.
She just mentioned that he had expanded Egypt to its greatest size ever, which would have included Babylon. Where Babylon was where I was raised on Long Island, a place called West Babylon on Long Island, which was part of the old place, was part of the Montauk, which Chief Wyandanch was part of the Native Americans, Indians that were there during that time, and the story behind that. So when he mentioned how this all comes together, I know what it's saying. I know what it means. So I'm just letting you see that the whole idea of the expansion of Egypt through Thutmose III included Babylon. So the connection between that and what I'm saying is there. Whether you can take it or leave it, cognitive dissonance can set in at any moment, could have set in already, but this is what it is.
So your monument, it's an obelisk.
Many people in the city of New York and elsewhere don't even know that there is an Egyptian obelisk here.
So is this a real Egyptian obelisk?
Yes, it is known as Cleopatra's Needle.
It's covered in scaffolding. What's that all about?
Well, what happened was about 2.5 years ago, an associate and I, we sent some photographs of the obelisk in its current condition to the head of the Supreme Council of Antiquities in Egypt.
So what exactly were you concerned about?
We saw some cracks. The hieroglyphs were eroded. We were concerned that this was a condition that was going to continue unless some attention was paid to it.
All you have to do is look at it. You can see that the corners at the base are very degraded. And on the second level of scaffolding, you can't even see the hieroglyphics. And even though this thing is a granite, which is generally a very hard and durable rock, in a climate like New York with many freeze-thaw cycles, if you don't take care of it, it's going to fall apart.
That's right.
You mentioned something about that cartouche being on here.
Since the scaffolding is up there, we really can't see it. So I do have some photos here that you can see the cartouche right there.
So we know that this is the cartouche for Tutmosis III.
That's correct.
But what does the rest of the hieroglyphics say on this obelisk?
What it generally says is that Tutmosis was a great pharaoh and that he extends his gratitude to Amun-Ra for his greatness.
Amun-Ra, that's the sun god.
Yes.
The most important god of all of Egypt, for the simple reason that without the sun, there would be nothing.
That's right. And they understood that energy.
Sure.
During the time of Tutmosis,
As she just said, they understood the energy. The energy that she's just expressed exists. It's never went away. This is why I could show this from back then to right now. And I'll show it as it is. The energy. It doesn't mean because it's ancient Egypt or anywhere else that somehow it just goes away because some people decide to believe in something else. Believing is just something that people choose to do. The truth facts exist regardless of how you think, how you feel. The truth exists. So facts itself don't go away because you want to believe something else. This is what I'm showing here. You know, like I said, I can explain it, I can show it, but cognitive dissonance could set in at any moment, could have set in already. And you might say, well, this is just a big coincidence. He's just saying this. And, you know, I can show you 100 things and still get to the point where you'll say, oh, you know, I just believe this. That means you just made everything irrelevant in your mind because believing is not what we're dealing with here. I'm dealing with facts. I'm dealing with the truth. And this is why I look at this and I can come out and I can stand up against anything. I've been to court. I've been to federal court. Looked the magistrate in the eyes, the U.S. attorney in the eyes, and told him, as I put down, and they tried to put me in a position of taking some type of psychological course or something because I told them what I'm telling you right now and showing you. I don't need no bunch of people behind me to make this real or not. I don't need believers to follow me, to boost me up. This is what it is. It's the truth. Just as the sun sits up in the sky by itself, surrounded by darkness. The same way I sit here, I'm surrounded by the ignorance of darkness. You can show the truth all day, and then they'll just resort back to darkness, into beliefs that basically keep them comfortable. That's why you have 30,000 different denominations in just Christianity alone, because you don't need proof of anything. You just say it. Sounds good. People buy it because it makes them feel good. I'm not trying to make people feel good. I want you to see what it is. So even if I can explain it and show this how it exactly ties in to what I'm telling you, it's irrelevant to most people because they'll just choose to bury their head in the sand or be in denial, as denial is a river. But denial is not.
The top of the pyramid, what's called the capstone, would have been covered in gold, and that would have radiated all over. And there were over 100 obelisks, and these all would have been lighting up all of ancient Egypt.
When Dorothy mentioned there were more obelisks like this, and that some were capped in gold, I remembered one I saw on a recent vacation in Paris. The Obelisk of Luxor is located at the Place de la Concorde, which means place of peace. This obelisk was erected to symbolize peace and placed at the spot where a guillotine used to stand. The same guillotine used to kill King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. The placement of this obelisk is very significant to Paris's history. But now I'm wondering if the placement of New York's obelisk also has meaning. When I look at this obelisk here that came from Egypt, my question is, why here? Why did they?
Now, when he said that, why here? Why this location? Now they're going to tell you the way he laid it out, the way they put it there, but I'm going to tell you a little something about this location in this time. Now, when I went back to New York, I explained how I went, and I went to Virginia, and I saw that at this time it was August, and Marcus Garvey's birthday, Harlem Week, and how I was drawn to Central Park. They kept calling me the obelisk, but there was something else that I found out once I got there, and what I know, and it connected it all together. This used to be called Seneca Village. It was settled and actually founded by some black people who had made a settlement in what was called Central Park now. They call it Seneca Village. So it was predominantly black. You had some Irish and some Germans, people who come in from Europe that didn't see themselves as white. They just see themselves as people trying to just struggle and live like everybody else, until maybe a generation later they realize that the benefit of being white may have given them some advantage that they may have not have seen earlier. But at that point, there was people living together, and they were in harmony until they decided to take over that area. And through the state eminent domain, they took it, even though there was graves and people lived there, were born and raised, from 1825. The final time when they actually took it over completely was 1857, which just brings it back to the connection between here and Orlando, because 1857 was when they renamed Orlando from Jernigan's to Orlando, which was 1857, was the same year, March 6, 1857, was the year and the time of the Dred Scott decision from the Supreme Court, which basically opened up slavery throughout the United States by saying that there was no right of a black man that the white man had to respect. That was Chief Justice Taney. So that opened up the fact that there was nobody who had to respect, and this basically legalized slavery throughout the United States until the 14th Amendment, and which brought out the Civil War, which is part of the man who brought this obelisk was in the Civil War, which, like I said, there's a connection. Whether it's obvious or just happenstance, the connection is there because the timing of what they're saying and what Central Park stood for is all relevant, considering that the obelisk came out of Egypt, which Egypt is Africa. It's not the Middle East. It's not some mystical Atlantic place that people just unknown and settle there because they want to direct it anywhere else but to the people that lived in the area. That's why even there's a language now that people are discovering is called Tut. that was a coded language. So we can put away all the little childish things about what this meant and how this is not connected and all the nonsense. But we can understand that this here is real.
They place it at this spot in Central Park.
It's no accident that the obelisk is here.
I don't think it's an accident either. How long has it been here in the park?
It's
not an accident. Now I'm going to show you my connection through my time, that when I was there in New York, and like I said, I'm directly connected to this obelisk. And I can challenge anybody. If you feel like you are, somebody feels like they are, then let's put it out there. I got mine. Let's see yours.